Here are some instructions for different cuts you might be faced with in your installations. Some of these can be avoided by getting corner pieces, but it's worth knowing how to make these cuts nonetheless.
First cut we call the basic cut. We're simply going to cut this hat track at a desired point. Need to make 2 relief cuts on the flanges, otherwise we can't get the shears into position for the vertical cut. I like to cut out 2 small triangles on the flanges for this. Notice I have 2 shears, red ones and green ones, which are for the left and right cuts respectively. Use the one that matches the side of the cut you want to keep relative to your hand. If I want to keep the piece to the left of the cut, I use the red shears. This will keep the edge in good condition without bending it in undesirable ways. For the last edge, I use my thumb to ensure it breaks at the desired point as I bend it. This gives me a nice, clean edge. For the 90-degree corner, I'll show you 2 methods. The first one is the 90-degree cut. I'll first mark where I need to cut out the portion of the track so I can nest the other piece inside it. This will give me a clean look without gaps between the tracks. Notice I'm using the green shears because I'm keeping the track on my right side. First, I cut the flange. Then I bend it back so that I can cleanly cut the vertical part of the track next. Once I have the 2 surfaces cut, I'll take my linesman pliers and bend it back and forth until it breaks off at the corner. Notice I put some tape on the pliers. This helps prevent scuffing of the paint in case I need to bend a part that I'm keeping. Now I can nest the tracks for a clean and professional look. The second method is to make 2 45-degree cuts on the 2 pieces. On the second track, I've made another line that is offset by 1/4 of an inch. I'll show you why I did this shortly. As we did before, we'll cut the flange, bend it back and out of the way, then cut the vertical part of the track. Now I can take my linesman pliers and bend it until it breaks off at the corner. Next, I'll cut the offset line, not the first 45-degree line that I made. Then it's time to repeat the steps for the other track, but this time there's no offset line. Lastly, I'll cut the inside corners of the flanges so they don't interfere with each other when I join the tracks. When I put the tracks together, notice how the offset cut formed a tab, which overlaps the other track. This will hide any gaps that may otherwise form between the 2 tracks and give it a very clean look. Let's show you how to cut a fascia track. The first cut we'll do is for an inside corner. I begin by marking where the angle cuts need to be placed. On one of the tracks, I additionally mark where to cut off the inside lip. This is where the second track needs to nest inside, and the lip will otherwise be in the way. Once the lines are drawn, I like to mark an X on the parts that are being tossed. This helps me prevent mistakes while also choosing the correct shears for the cut. Then it's time to cut the angles. The last cut here is the lip on one of the tracks only, so that we can nest them. I'll break it off with the linesman pliers. After putting the tracks together, you'll notice the hook or ridge on the inside that the lights clip into will prevent a tight sit. Use the linesman pliers to crush them down so that the edges of the 2 tracks can meet. Here's how the track looks from the bottom. Nice, clean, and without any gaps. Now we'll do an outside corner cut for a fascia track. For this one, we only need to cut one of the tracks because the other will nest inside. Mark the edges of the cuts and then mark the angles. Draw X's to indicate which parts are being tossed. Begin cutting. The angle cut is the most difficult one. Once you've cut out the triangle, cut out the back surface as well. In this situation, I had to trim it a bit afterward, which is okay. Next, cut out the lip so we can nest the tracks. I'm leaving the bottom surface on for this track. After nesting the tracks, I noticed I needed to further trim back one edge. For the last cut, I can either leave the entire bottom surface overlapped, or I can trim it back while leaving a 1/4 inch tab to cover any gaps. Let's trim it back. There we go, nice and clean. In rare cases, you might need to make an obtuse or even an acute angle cut. The steps are the same for both, so let's review this 150-degree obtuse angle cut on a hat track. The first step is to mark out where the outside corner will be on the track. Then, using the speed square, rotate it to the 30-degree marker. This is calculated by subtracting 150 from 180 degrees. Marker reference. Then make a parallel offset line about a 1/4 inch of the way over. We'll leave this offset tab on to help cover any gaps when the tracks are placed together. Make your relief cuts. Then, cut the remainder of the lines, making sure to leave on the tab we formed by making the 1/4 inch offset line. Trim off any corners to provide a better fit. Now we've got a nice and professional obtuse cut.
Okay, so I've got my 4 parts here. I got the track, again a peak. I've got my peak piece, and then I've got my wings here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this hole with this peak piece. So I need to cut this part of the track out. So that's centered. Draw a line across here. I'll draw a line across here. And this is the part we're going to cut off. It's mostly in line here. What I like to do is actually, I'm going to cut off just a little bit extra just to move these holes a little closer so that my wire isn't too short. So I'm just going to cut off like an extra, I don't know, 1/4 inch here and a 1/4 inch here as well. So the peak will be a little bit closer to the next set of lights, but that's okay. You won't notice it from far away. And then I am going to bend this track towards myself here. So I'm going to pretend I'm working with a 12-12 pitch, which is a 45-degree angle. So that means I need to cut this part of the track out. And again, over here, I'm going to cut out this part of the track here as well. Okay. And so that once this part of the track is taken out, I'll be able to put these edges up against this edge here, and it'll create a nice seamless look here. So let's start our cuts. So this is my edge here, and we're gonna go up to here at about 45. The same thing over here. This is my edge here. Now to 45. This is about right there. This will cut off about here. This will be cut off at about there. And then we'll do the same thing across. So I'm gonna shut up. Okay, so that's about right there. And now we'll start cutting this up. My right cutter is here because I'm gonna keep my right side. And I'm going to bring it over here and I keep my left side. Cut this here. And then what I'm going to do now is bend this out of the way. Cut this all the way up to the edge here. And then we're going to cut all the way up to this edge here. There we go. Okay, do the same thing over on this side. I'm gonna keep my left side, so I'll use my red ones. Keep my right side, I'll use my green ones. Okay, bend this out of the way so it can work, fit. Okay, so we got it here, so I'm just gonna break this one off. Okay. And then I'm going to break this on over here. Cut this up here, 45-degree angle. Now I can do the same thing here. Okay, so I've now removed that. And you'll be able to see now. Place this inside. I'll go like so. This one, I'm going like so. And then over here, slide this in. And then over here, slide that in. So we've got our 2 tracks here at 45-degree angle. And if you find yourself with a little bit of a gap here, we can get our cutters out and trim it up a little bit better. Some of these I was just eyeballing, but this gives you a really nice clean look. And then if we're going to, when we peak this bulb, we need to extend this out to here. So I'm going to cut this flange off. I'm just going to take that. And we'll measure this off. I'm actually just going to square this off here as well. And we'll just... Okay. And we would do the same to the other side. Again, this should be done up on the actual roof to draw these lines to make sure that you don't end up with a hole. And so pop this through here. So we'll cut off 45 here. Then we'll cut inside here. Okay, so now we got our peak piece. Set. This sits in here. This sits in here. And of course, the lights will fit in here. And that just snaps in place. And then we can put in our next set of lights. Over here as well, in place. And so now the lights will hold the peak in. It's quite rigid, and you would just screw the track. They'll screw the track in on the flanges like normal, and we don't have a big hole in the top of the gable like this, and it looks seamless.